So we're going to be starting to paint today. I've provided 16 images here of some owls that I had the good fortune of having in hand near the end of October. And there's just a variety of different poses and different things here. I did have a challenge finding anything because of the way we handle these birds, finding anything that really showed the breast in here. So you may want to look for some pictures online and things like that that'll help inform some of the streaking on the breast. But the one thing that I did notice that I want to talk about here that I did notice is the significant variation from one individual to the next. Like you see on things like Wildfall Carving magazine, I've got an old Wildfall Carving magazine um, article here or cover that shows a couple of painted Saw Whet Owls. I think these were done by Floyd Schultz. Yeah, these are Floyd Schultz did these. Um, Pretty amazing. But you see some of the barring and the coloration, the little margins on the Cape feathers, and then some of the streaking down on the front here, work on the facial disc and the crown and that kind of stuff. That's all really, really cool. But if you look at the back on these birds here, um, you look at the very back of um, of the side here and what happens on the cape, that kind of thing. Thank you. And then I look at some of these photographs that I took of these birds in hand. Now you can see some of that on the back here. You can see some of those little white lines coming down on the cape. They vary a little bit, but there's one of these owls. You see some of those lines a little bit different from one to the next. Some of them are more pronounced. Some of them have a very pronounced pattern on the back of the head, some of them not as much. But there was one of these birds here. This is the one that I wanted to point out. And we actually saw a couple like this. Look at this guy here. It doesn't actually have those marks on the outside of the cape. It's got a little different marking here. And one of the things that I learned when I was learning about these little saw-whets, most of the birds that we caught had uniform color in their plumage. The tail feathers all had nice row barring on them. Like the barring was nice and in rows, and the feathers were all the same color, that kind of thing. But there were a number of them that we caught um, that had a variation in the feather coloration. Like the barring was all broken up, and some of the feathers were actually a different color. And one of the things I learned about that was that the birds that had broken up barring and had different color, I guess I don't have any of those pictures in this group, because most of the birds we caught had uniform color in here. And what that was is indicative of a what they call a hatch year bird, which means the bird's less than a year old, would have hatched that year. All his feathers are uniformly grew at the same time. They're all the same color. And these birds have a continuous molt so that as they age, some of their feathers fall out and they're replaced not as a group, but just individually. And so that they never do a complete molt where they lose a whole bunch of feathers. And if that's the case, some of the adults that we got had some of the feathers looked a little more faded and some had a little more reddish brown in them and stuff like that. And that's indicative of a bird that's over a year old. And so it's possible, like with this guy here that doesn't really show anything on the back of his cape, it's because of the coloration on the feathers, this would appear to be a hatchier bird. Like this bird is quite young. But it's not, my point, I guess, is you look at your reference, decide what you want to do. It's not incorrect to paint him this way. But if you put him in a competition, the judge might look and go, hey, where's all those little white bars on the cape? Because that's fairly typical. That's what you usually see. A couple of pictures here that I've downloaded from the internet just to kind of help understand what these little streaking and barring can be. You see some of those little white margins on the side of the cape there. This guy here, very similar, but not real pronounced on the cape. And again, when you look at the feathers, if the feathers are all uniformly colored, it's probably a hatchier bird. This is just another one off the internet to kind of give you an idea of what that streaking can look like, the different random streaking coming down here. In terms of the actual color, they have they're they're quite a like a neutral brown overall is what I saw when we were handling them, but they do have a certain amount of reddish brown. Like this is showing up more red than I would see them when I was handling them, but they do have a certain amount of reddish brown, particularly more below the facial disc and a little bit within the facial disc. The colors that you're going to see on these, we're just going to work with earth tones. We're using burnt umber, raw sienna, and yellow ochre, yellow oxide. Those are kind of our primary palette. They're just earthy browns and so forth. There's a number of things you can do. There's a lot of approaches when you're painting a brown bird like this. We're just going to mostly stick with the earth tones, the black and the white, to kind of keep it fairly simple. The reality is we could do an entire 10 weeks just on painting something like this, like that, like anything. It depends on how deep you want to dive. But I'm going to be kind of looking at my photographs that I've taken of actual specimens, and I'm going to kind of go by this. I find when you're looking at painting techniques, it can be really helpful to look at a really high quality painted bird as opposed to a live bird and just kind of get an idea of how some of the brush strokes were done and how some of these margins were put in. In my opinion, these margins along the back here are probably a little overdone for the way I would like to do it. Um, I'm not being critical of Floyd's stuff. Amazing stuff, and he works with reference, and he would have had birds, with that kind of configuration. It's just when I look at the actual specimens that I see, I don't see that. I don't see that being quite so pronounced. I see a smaller number, and they're a little bit more kind of softer looking than these up in here. But it's basically wherever you want to go. You're looking at your own reference and deciding what you want to do from there. So the approach that I'm going to take here, I'm going to start off with just some kind of, if you will, soft base coating. Like I want to define some general areas, and obviously the back, like the overall back, most of the facial disc, and even on this little guy, see the streaking on the breast is pretty intense. Like it's not this fine little occasional little streaks like you see on some of the other photographs. Like look at the difference between the streaking on this guy and the almost brown on this one. I find that when I see photographs, the streaking is more typical, like having some streaks in there. So if you look at what I see here and what I really like is kind of three different groups that sort of interplay with each other. This one's got kind of still three groups, but they're skinnier. So these are three wider groups. So when I put in my base coating, just to get an idea of my roadmap for where all the colors are on this bird, I want to keep the head and the back and everything dark, darken up a little bit on the outside of the facial disc, and then lay in these three streaks here. And I don't want to do it in a really pronounced coloring book kind of way. I want to keep everything soft and subtle. So I'm going to start with just burnt umber. Now, the difference between burnt umber and raw umber is burnt umber is a reddish brown, reddish umber. So it's pretty close. The Joe Sonia burnt umber is pretty close to what I saw with the live birds that I was handling. The burnt umber is a fairly close. If you want to darken it up a little bit, make it more neutral, you can add a tiny bit of blue to it or a tiny bit of black. If you want to make it a little redder, you can add some raw or some burnt sienna or a little bit of red to it and make it a little bit redder. So you can adjust it that way. But I think we'll start with just the base coat here. And if it turns out to be not warm enough or not cool enough, we can adjust it as we carry on through the bird. One thing, if I could get somebody to grab me a bottle of Flow Medium in that tub there, that should be marked Flow on the top. There should be one that says Flow.
I'll say clean.
Flow Medium?
Yeah.
That's the one. Sorry, I forgot to grab a Flow Medium when I was, okay. So as I mentioning on, whenever I work with Joe Sonia paint, I always add a drop or two of Flow Medium to the paint. You only need a couple of drops, but it's an important thing to do. I'm going to dilute this with probably at least double water to what is there for paint. So I'm just using a little syringe to add that, and then I'm going to mix it with a palette knife. Just saves wear and tear on your brushes. You could use a crappy, cheap little brush to mix, but I wouldn't use my good brushes for mixing paint. It just sometimes forces paint up into the ferrule and will shorten the life of a brush. I like the idea of using a good quality brush. Like I found that makes a big difference in my ability to paint. So when you're dealing with a dark color like this, it it covers really, really well. Like it doesn't, you can dilute it quite a bit and it's still going to give you some pretty strong coverage. I'm gonna just thin it out a little bit more. What I want is I tend to work with more wash consistency paints when I'm working with acrylics, or even when I'm working with oils. I usually dilute them quite a bit so that they're not really, really super intense. So, and I mean, can't see this on video, but I've just got an old towel here, just a kind of old bath towel that I use I throw that across my lap and I use that for cleaning up, just for cleaning things off. I use it for wiping off my palette knife while it's still wet. And now I'm going to take my brush that I'm using, and I'm using a Renaissance cat's tongue sable. It's made by Silver Brush. It's really a good quality sable brush, and I'm going to use that for most of the first steps that I'm doing here. First thing I want to do is I just want to get this brush wetted, get it loaded up with water, make sure that the bristles are nice and wet, the ferrule is there. That way I'm not forcing kind of semi-dry paint up into a dry ferrule. The brush will just last longer. I also like having a piece of paper towel with me close by. I've just kind of gotten in the habit of folding it into a little flat piece like this, and I'll just touch the brush to that. That's what I use to make sure that my brush isn't too heavily loaded. So now I'm going to just load my paint brush up with paint. You see, when I paint that on the paper towel, it doesn't give me a really super dark, um, like a heavy amount of paint. I'm going to dry the brush off a little bit on the towel, on the paper towel. Then I'm going to take this and just to get a sense of this is a good place to start. My bird is mounted on a painting stick like we talked about in the last video when we sealed them. What I want to do, this is a good thing to practice on, is to take this and if you do a light touch on the end of your brush, see, do this on the back because you can't mess it up. If you start doing it right away on the streaks, you could, oh, my brush is too heavy. I made a mess of things. But once you've got this so that it's just putting small amounts of paint down like that, you see it, there's not a lot happening there. When you start doing that, and this whole back is going to be brown, so you can do whatever you want practicing with this to try to do some streaks down the back like that, just soft looking streaks. And so now in the front of the bird, if you see, I'm just going to turn this on and use my dust collector as use it as a little palette here that I can stick my photograph on to reference. But if I look at what's happening with these streaks down in here, what I can do is below on the very, very front of the body, below here, I can take some of this and I can just lightly dab. Oh, I'm too high. There we go. I just lightly dab below the neck here. I'm hardly touching the surface here. So I'm trying to replicate these little areas in here. And I'm doing it really soft and light. Down the middle, it's nice and light. And I'll maybe I'll just kind of replicate something that I like here. So you can see those three that I'm putting in, and then I'll just kind of do the similar type thing on the other side. They don't have to be perfect or great. I want them quite soft. And not necessarily nice and straight and well defined. Like if there's a little smudge here and a little streak there, that's probably a good thing. I can always further refine them a little later with some white. Like it's always the painting technique that I use is a back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'll paint something, sometimes make it a little too dark, and then I'll come back and adjust it with the white, and then I'll darken it again. And I keep on kind of overshooting my target. I do that intentionally. That's what gives you the softness. You can't just do these things in one application of paint. It just doesn't work. So I've got those. I played around on the back here with my brush, and see my brush is drying out now, so there's not much coming out. This is actually a nice place to be if you want to soften something up a little bit in some area, create a little softer blend, is use your brush when it's almost dry and just go over it a bunch of times. And that'll create almost like an airbrushed look, soften things up quite a bit. So this is all I've tried to do with this is I've basically tried to set up my roadmap for what these shapes are going to be like. I can pick up a little bit more. I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint from my palette and dry it out on my paper towel like I did before. And now I want to do the similar type thing on the facial disc. I come in, if I look here, it's almost straight down from the eye is where the edge of that disc gets dark. So I go about 1/3 way in from the eye, and from there out, the facial disc is dark. So if I just take this and lay this in on the edge, and I'll do a little bit dark more right at the outer edge, and then come and do the other side. And there's no problem if you have to go over it several times to get some intensity. Like what I really want to do is I want to have a bit of softness at the transition here. I don't want this to be like, I'm not trying to color in the lines or anything like that. I'm creating a softer kind of an edge and a blend. And once again, if you come a little too far with it, this is very forgiving. If you come a little too far with it, you can always come back with some white later and use a similar technique with white to blend some white back in to soften things up. Now, again, I'm just going to pick up a little bit more paint, load up my brush with this wash, take my paper towel here, or paper towel, and just dry out the brush so there's not a lot of paint left in it, and then come back in from the outside looking in. Again, nice thing about these cat's tongue brushes that I'm using is I'll go onto a flat part here. If you just lay them down and do a few little pokes like this, they have a bit of a round margin to them. They're not just a square. Like if you use a square brush, it doesn't work quite as well as something like this. And so now what I'll do is I'll brush away to get my brush to just the right consistency of paint and so forth. I'm going to brush away a little on the back here because, again, this whole back is going to be painted pretty dark brown. So I just use this for cleaning out my brush. And then this allows me to come in to some of these areas on the facial disc here and just have a really soft kind of there's almost nothing left in the brush. So it just softens up the transition. So I use that. This is a real nice forgiving kind of thing on the Saw Whets, is that I can use this back to get my brush all prepped properly so that it has the look that I want. And a little bit of streakiness isn't going to be a problem. If you see there's some streakiness in there, both sides of the facial disc. I've got my little lines, my roadmap done here for the streaks on the breast. And then I think the last thing that I'm going to do is, now that I've got those laid in so I can see roughly where everything's supposed to be, now what I want to do is I'm going to load up my brush and I'm going to just start painting the back. The wings, the tail. Keep spreading the paint around. I don't want to have any big puddles anywhere. See, this is a wash, so it's not going to give you a really, really intense coverage. You build up your coverage with layers. So I want to go, and it's a good idea to practice like coming up to an edge like this. Now I'm going to be ultimately trying to decide, okay, on that back, I'm going to look at my other photographs and decide, is this brown or is it streaked? I think it's going to be more streaked at this point, but it's a good idea to practice your transition. Like when you're coming up to the edge of the side pocket here, you bring your brush and try not to paint the actual side pocket, but come right up to it. And your brush stroke should always be in the direction of your feather flow in your paint. I'll have to pick up a little more paint here. And I'll work that, spread it out in the wide open spaces here. And then as I get more towards the edge, when my brush isn't as loaded up, now I can come in here, and I did get a little bit, you can see I got a little bit on the facial disc here. Again, not a big problem. We'll just adjust that with some weight later on. And another reminder is that a little bit of streakiness, you see this is not looking nice and uniform and even in here. That's not a problem. In fact, for me, it's usually desirable to have it like that. I'm just going to kind of do the whole, we'll leave this kind of a little bit half unpainted right now. I'll come back and touch it up later if I need to. More paint. You see how when I first put that down, the brush is pretty wet, but as I spread this paint out on the head, I'm just mostly trying to use the tip of the brush. And I'm going in the direction of my feather flow. Now, as I come down into the forehead here, it's dark all the way down into the eyebrows. Try not to paint the eyebrows if you can avoid it. If you do happen to streak a little bit of paint onto the eyebrows, don't worry about it. Don't try to get rid of it or anything like that. Just go with whatever happens. Because again, we can come back to some white and touch up. So now you see the little blotchiness that's developing from putting these layers on. And what I find interesting is if we look at some of the photographs of the head from above here, I actually see some blotchiness. Like there's a bit of random blotchiness in some of these feathers. Some are darker and some are lighter. And you can quickly and easily emulate that by just keeping things, when you put your washes on top of these dark areas, you can emulate that by just layering the washes and leaving them a little bit blobby. So if we go with, there we go. If we go with what we got so far, see, it's not exactly looking uniform and smooth, and that's desirable for me. I really want to stress that. I can make it look really uniform and smooth if I use an airbrush, and then the airbrush pieces to me just don't look like live birds. They look like something made out of ceramic. I get a much more satisfying result if I can build up the color in washes. And also, yeah, I'm not sure how this will show up, but if we look at this, what I've got here is actually even a little bit more red in color than what's showing on the photographs. The photographs are more neutral. See, there's a little more red in the primaries on the wingtip feathers in the photograph, but it's a little browner on the body. And these are some things that I noticed in being able to handle these birds live, as opposed to just looking at photographs of them. I got a sense of what this color needs to be. So the other thing I'm going to do is, I think on the back, look and see if we got anything to inform. I think actually, yeah, I'm going to, this back streaky area in here, I'm going to darken that up a little bit. I'm going to bring that um, darken it up a little bit. I think I'll do the same thing. Yeah, a little bit underneath where the throat feathers are here. So I'll take my brush, load it up, dab it off on my paper towel, like so I'm drying it out pretty dry, and then just come over here and just kind of touch up a little bit in these areas down in here. Okay, so now once this is dry, I think what I'll do is we'll pause the demo here, and I'll get you guys your painting. You can start drying out your brush, putting some of the practice on the back, put some of these little streaks in, get that laid out, the roadmap for how you want these streaks to look. And you can see how that's already starting to look kind of interesting with the soft looking streaks coming down. And you will be defining them and refining them more as time goes on. So that's what we'll do. We'll do that little demo there. You guys can work on your own birds. I'm going to let this dry before I mean, I could keep working on it, but it's best if you can let it dry before you put the next coat on. Because if you've got an area that isn't fully dry and you go to put another layer on, sometimes you lift off your first layer. This isn't a problem with acrylics. So it's probably smart to let this dry. If you're working on it at home and you want to get right to it, maybe take a little hair dryer and give it a shot for, not hot, but flow a little warm air over it gently with a hair dryer to help dry it out before you start putting your next layer on. One of the things when you're working with washes is that you really want to make sure that you give them a good chance to dry between applications. So what I want to do now is I've given this a good chance to dry. You see it looks pretty streaky and blotchy, which is actually desirable. I really want to emphasize that. That's not a mistake. But before I get into this next round, it's just a good idea. I should have done this before, like right after I finished the last round, but take a little bit of brush soap, using the Joe Sonia brush soap, work it into my brush. I actually had this brush soaking in water while I was letting the bird dry. I generally don't do that. I usually try to clean my brush out right away when I'm done using it. It's just healthier for the brush. I clean out the crud in the brush, rinse it out, and then kind of dry it off in the water. I'll quite often use my little lap towel to perform some of these steps, but just to keep my water fairly clean, I don't take brush soap and rinse out the brush soap. I always wipe out the brush soap on my towel or cloth before I rinse the brush. That just keeps my water a little fresher. So now I'm going to pick up some of this wash, which I've basically diluted to hopefully the same thickness as it was the first time around. If I put it on and it looks a little too thick, then I'll just leave the streakiness in there and I'll add a little more water to it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to kind of start more or less like I did before, but I'm still going to go over my streaks a little bit, but I'm just going to start now by going over the back and keep going on this until my brush is fairly dry. You can do exactly what you did the first time around if you want. But I'm just going to go until my brush is fairly dry here. And then I'm going to try just seeing on the back of the facial disc if I want to darken up some areas, or if I want to intensify some of these little, just create a little bit more interest in where these streaks are. I'm kind of turning the brush on the side and doing a few little actual streaks rather than you can look at a photograph and just see what these end up being like little blob streaks. See what's happening there? Real quick, simple little strokes, but they actually look pretty cool. They start to look a little bit more like what the actual bird is. They're a little random. And then I'll just take pick up a little more paint here. I had some areas in the back of the facial disc that the brush didn't really cover just because of the way my texture was. And now what I'm doing is you'll see I'm actually painting this, pick up a little bit of paint and painting this so that I have deliberate little blotches and streaks. I don't want big puddles of paint there. I don't want to leave big puddles of paint. I still want to make sure that the paint's not going on super thick. But see what's happening there? It's a kind of a little more organic way of painting where I'm not trying to paint in a whole bunch of individual feathers, but I'm also not trying to make this thing look uniform. See what I'm maybe on the top of the head here. You can see I'll pick up just a little bit more paint. And if I got an area here, this is a little light right there, leave it. Don't poke away at it and poke away at it. You make it lighter. Just let it be what it is. This randomness that you're dealing with on painting these things and the randomness and streakiness you end up with will actually enhance the overall look of the piece when you're done. I think we often get stuck into this mindset of having to make everything look nice and smooth and perfect. And I found that the piece looks a lot more natural if you avoid that temptation. Just let it kind of be a little blotchy, as long as you don't have great big huge puddles of paint. Now see, I left that in here. I left a puddle there for a bit and I went over it again and it actually lifted some of the paint off. This is a danger that you run into when you're working with washes. If you're not careful, sometimes you can do that. Once again, I'm not going to even worry about that. I'm not going to overwork it and try to make it dark. I'm just going to kind of keep going over everything here. I've got a little area under the other side of the wing here that is very white. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my wash here and flow a little bit of the wash into that low area there. What's that?
On mine, I went too dark.
Yeah. So what we can do, and I'll maybe do a little demonstration on that. Oh, and you know what? I forgot to do when we were doing this the first time around. I forgot to do the tail. Like the upper side of the tail is brown too. So you want to make sure you get that. If you haven't done that on yours already, if you did, then you're one step ahead of me. But upper side of the tail and the underside of the wing here. You want to make sure that you get the underside of that wing nice and brown there. So you see that unevenness? These really jump out, these two little spots here. No problem. Not going to stress over that. And then I'll maybe just bring a little bit more soft, like very light touch, a little bit more soft streaking coming into the facial disc here. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe just put a few little blotches, random little blotches down in this area on the front of the throat here. And then same thing on this side, just maybe a couple more random little blotches. I try to keep my brush going in the direction of the feather flow most of the time. more or less. But so it's looking a little blotchy. You see in some areas really dark. And as the paint dries, some of the dark areas will get a little more translucent. I also noticed up in here, right up near the eyebrow, I've got some areas that aren't very well covered. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of paint and flow that down into any little low spots that haven't been covered properly. I don't want any dry valleys in there, like little white dry valleys on any of this stuff. That usually doesn't look very good. Now I can take this. This is dry enough now. It feels dry to touch. I can just take a little bit of this burnt umber and just put a dot over top. Still didn't cover completely, but it'll help. And by the time I get all the feather edges and everything on here, it'll just blend itself in. It'll look really good. So there's my second coat. You see already some of the real soft fluffiness is starting to come out just from the way we're painting it. And we will be enhancing that as we go along with this piece. So now, Neil, you were saying that you think your streaks are a little too so too pronounced on the front. So maybe what I'll do is I'll do a quick little demonstration to show you what I would do about that. You want to bring your bird over here?
And that's going to be famous.
If you could bring another plate for a palette over here for me, clean one. So what I'm gonna do here is I'll just set my number off to the side here. So now we have a bird here. These aren't too bad, actually. No, you know what? I don't really think I'd worry about those. They're no, I think they're pretty good. What you'll do is just keep on going, like put the little blotches in. I was thinking if they are, way too pronounced, but I don't think they are. I think they look really good. Like if we look at the variation from one individual to the next, some of them were heavily streaked than others. So unless you really want them to be softer,
What about symmetry?
I wouldn't really worry about that too much. You've got you're pretty good there. I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think you can adjust. What I would do is I would adjust. You've got these three. You've got these three on the one side. The middle of the bird is kind of down the center here, and you've got, ideally it'd be nicer to have three of them on each side of the center, like your center line is here. So yeah, maybe this wouldn't be a bad place to do the adjustment. You know what? I think let's do that. Let's demonstrate how that works. I'm going to take some warm white. You could use warm white or unbleached titanium. I wouldn't use titanium white for this. You could just in a really thin wash, but I'd taken like a more of an off-white, like warm white or unbleached titanium. I'm using warm white in this case. And a couple of drops of flow medium. That's more than a couple of drops. And a bunch of water. No, I'm just gonna clean out my brush that I was using with the burnt umber. Again, just a couple of drops of brush soap. Clean all the burnt umber out of my brush. In this case, also, if you happen to have a tiny little bit of burnt umber left in your brush when you're done this step, not the end of the world, because you're putting on a wash of white. I'm just going to mix in this warm white here. Trick is mixing it up as a wash, white thin, sort of like we applied last class when we applied the base coat, the white base coat. We didn't want the paint to be too thick because we didn't want it to fill in our detail. So now I'm just going to pick up some of this warm white here. And what I want to do with this is just dab out my brush lightly on a piece of paper towel. Just light dab on the paper towel just to get rid of the bulk of this real sloppiness. And then I can go over this Now it looks a little scary when you first do it because it looks like what I'm painting over top of my, but you'll see I'll pick up just a little bit more, dab it off. Yeah, that wasn't quite enough. Dab it off. And any areas that you want to soften up, you can just come over with a flow, like a little wash of white like this. Not sure I really needed to do that area, but so now as we watch the paint dry, you'll notice that the area that I first put this white on, which looked pretty white when I first laid it down, is getting darker and darker and darker as the paint dries. And so what ends up happening with just putting in a little wash like that, any areas that you think are a little bit too pronounced and too sharp, like if you wanted to soften up a transition here on the facial disc and anything that you want to soften up, and just take a little bit of this white and brush it back into the brown, and it create a fairly subtle change. The other thing that probably wouldn't be a bad idea in this case is while you got the white here, just flow a little bit more white over top of your epoxy putty on the eye. If your eye epoxy is still looking a little dark, probably not a bad idea just to lay a little bit more white down in there. It's still going to, when it dries, it's still going to look fairly dark. But anyway, see how these streaks are not, when I first put the white on, they look like, oh, I've just covered it up, but I'm using a thin wash. So I know from experience that as the wash dries, it becomes more transparent. It's just the nature of a white wash. And you can build that up in a couple of layers, because as part of this whole back and forth process, you're going to want to you're going to be coming back later on with some burnt umber once this is dry. There we go. And it's not even a problem if you just put a few little blobs in here, so that this isn't, you don't have to paint a uniform. Just like I put brown blobs, or maybe you can put white blobs. Like there's nothing saying that this has to be perfectly uniform. So you see what we've got there, just softening that up. Once it dries, you've still got your roadmap, you know where things are going. But if you wanted to, like what I would suggest is on this side here, put in one, move one over a little bit more and move this one over more, like, have a brown streak that's coming right along the edge of this, having one down the middle and one along the edge. So you got three, keep in mind where your center line is on the bird, and have three streaks on the one side and three streaks on the other side. And you know what? If there's a vestige of the underneath streaks in behind, that's actually going to probably look good. It'll probably look softer. So you see how that looks now? The road maps are still there, but it's a lot less pronounced. And just quick little touch of a wash can do all kinds of things. If you're running into problems with some blobs or streaks or something on the back that you're not crazy about, you could flow a little wash of warm white over the entire back, let it dry, and then come back and put your brown over top of it. No, you're using washes like this. You could put on 50 washes without worrying about filling in your detail. That's one of the nice things about using this wash technique is, it's very forgiving that way. So if any of you think that you want to do a little bit of adjusting, like you see by contrast, if you look at what I've got on the breast of mine, and you'll see that I put in three streaks on either side of the center. Down the middle of the body, I put in three streaks on either side. I actually kind of put a fourth one on this side. I might put a little bit more, a vestige of one over onto this side a little bit. Although I may not. We'll see what it looks like. But you get the idea where you have your road map, but it's not as pronounced anymore. You just soften it up with some warm white. So I'm going to let this dry. I'll let you guys work on your second coat, and then we'll so you can see the let's turn this around so you can kind of see where I'm at right now. See that blotchiness that I've done, like the blotchiness of the paint for that second coat actually looks pretty good. Like, I mean, I don't know, maybe to you it might not. It might just look kind of blotchy and inconsistent, but to me it looks great. And I'm looking forward to, enhancing it and starting to um, show off individual feathers on that, so you can get an idea what we're after now. This is now that the paint's dry, and I'm actually going to go and do a little bit more on the back and the tail on the next demonstration, and probably a little bit more on the head. And that one of the keys with painting is subtlety. You know, you want to keep things looking a little bit soft, a little ambiguous. Um, you don't want them to look too, like on most birds like this, you want them looking a little cryptic. You don't want them looking too perfect. So just as a little bit of a side thing on the way we do things in the classroom here, like I mentioned, I've got just an old shop towel here, an old bath towel that's got all kinds of stains and garbage on it. I need that, Neil. Okay. And so what I do is I just use these. You used to use styrofoam plates and throw them out, but this is actually a lot better. It's a fairly heavy plastic plate at the dollar stores and that kind of thing. And then I'm using an ammonia-based glass cleaner. It's really important that it has ammonia in it, but just spray that glass cleaner on the palette and just get a paper towel here and scrub away at it a little bit. And I mean, not that I'm trying to be cheap or anything like that, because these plates aren't that expensive, but it seems you're always, if you're throwing them out all the time, you're always running out of them, having to go back to the store and buy more. And there's no reason for a few cents worth of window cleaner. You can't just kind of wipe these things out just using a paper towel and then another quick little shot of window cleaner. And, you know, so two pieces of paper towel and a little bit of window cleaner, and you've reconstituted your palette. So you just keep on using it again. By the way, window cleaner, anything with ammonia in it, will wreak havoc on the acrylic polymer emulsion, like any of the acrylic paints. If you don't have brush cleaner and you've got to clean up some dried acrylic paint, ammonia-based window cleaner or anything with ammonia in it will really break down the paint quite a bit. So you can see that pretty good, ready to go again. And you don't want to keep adding paint to a dry palette. So a lot of times if you do add more paint to a dry palette and mix it up, you end up with these little crusty things in there, little flakes, and you don't want them to be part of your package either. Okay, so anyway, got my photographs here. I'm going to take my bird that I've got this is the first one that I was working on. I actually started working on a second one. I got the first coat on the second one. You see a little bit of my road map for the streaks and a little blobby blotchiness happening there. I'm not going to do much more work on him, but I just thought while I had a few minutes. So now I'm gonna continue on with a wash of burnt umber. So this is where, like, the approach that I've got with all my painting, a couple of drops of flow medium, a little blob of water, mixing a wash. Oh, here, have I? Okay. Mixing a wash. Probably better too thin than too thick when you're mixing these washes. You know, you're better off building it up in two or three layers than trying to do it in one. A whole bunch of reasons. Doing it in two or three layers always gives you softer looking results, uh, more organic looking results. I just wiped off my palette knife here on my lap towel. Um, I just want to quickly, before I do any more of a demonstration, I just want to quickly take a couple of pictures of this guy. I meant to do that before. So, get back into, you want to be here, bump the camera. So the last thing I want to do with this burnt umber is I think I'm okay with the way the streaks are looking on this right now. And I'm quite okay with the way these streaks are looking. I just want to kind of darken up, especially the upper side of the tail, and just darken up some of these back areas here. If I look at my photographs, you see they aren't dark, 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 but you know, they're definitely a, you know, kind of a nice rich brown in here. See, the cape is a little darker on this one than the back. This is that one with the anomaly. It doesn't have the little white marks on the edge. But, you know, anyway, looking fairly dark. So I'm going to take my burnt umber here, pick up a little bit of the wash, and then there we go. Pick up a little bit of the wash and just kind of paint another layer of wash over the back. Keep the paint moving. I'm kind of flowing a bit of a wash on here now. I'm not trying to necessarily darken anything. I'm just really trying to wet these areas. You know, by using a wash like this, what also happens, you'll notice that if you just flow that wash in, that the paint tends to congregate in the valleys, in the low spots of your carving. The other thing that I also realized as I'm doing this is I need to put a little bit of this coating underneath the tail. Get a little bit of this brown on the underside of the tail. I'm just kind of flowing a good wash of that on the underside of the tail. And I notice also underside the wing here, I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but yeah, you can see a little bit here. There's a couple of spots that I missed. So I can just flow some nice wash on the underside of the wing too. I want that to be nice and brown. I don't want that white. So you can see this is already in places, this is already starting to look dull here. It means it's starting to dry, but you can see how right in here, you should be able to see how the pigments are congregating. See if I come on closer here, if it starts to focus on that. Come on, there we go. You see how the pigments are starting to concentrate down in the valleys, in the low spots here. So it's actually bringing out the detail that you've burned in on the bird. And that's another beauty of using washes. I'm also noticing on the tail here, I got a streak happening starting there. So I'm just going to dab out my brush a little bit and just use that to spread out that really distinct streak. Probably made it worse. I can always throw another layer on there once it dries. As I said, I don't want to get too worked up about it. On the top of the head here, I think I'm just going to lay in a little bit more paint and pick up a little bit more here. Do a little thin layer on the back of the head. This wash will just kind of, I'm not flowing a real heavy wash on the top of the head here. I'm just splashing a little bit of paint on there. It just kind of unifies things. And also noticed I got a little carried away up here. So I dried off my brush really good on my towel. I'm just going to come in here and just use that to dab up a little on the edge here. I can always come in with some white like we did earlier, and I can always come in and adjust it back with some white. So that's always an option. So there's the kind of just a little bit more of an adjustment down in here. Well, this is actually, it's kind of it varies a little bit on most of the birds, but yeah, there is some white edges. It wouldn't be a bad idea just to, um, get it a little bit darkened up, not necessarily, real dark because yeah, either way, you could put some wash in there later and then touch up the edges with, fine strokes or so go from there. Now, you'll also notice when I look at these photographs here, you see around the eye, this little area from the base of the eye coming out towards the eye ring. See how it's dark. It's almost black. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush here. And I'm just going to see I'm kind of getting rid of like I've got a piece of paper towel here, wet my brush, and then dry it out mostly, so that it's not really got that much paint left on it. And then I can come in here, and what I want to do now is with this area around the eye, I can come right into the eye and just kind of go from the base of the eye out towards, and with my brush being fairly dry now, see if that gets in focus. There we are. With my brush being fairly dry now, and I want to come from the base of the eye, like the outer edge of the eye, and just flick away from the eye to create that little soft hair-like texture. It lay the brush down in. See, as I pull away from the eye, it creates soft little hair-like textures. If you overdo it and you end up with it, too dark, or your lines come out too far, and again, looking at what I see here in these photographs, and just trying to, this is more of a roadmap than a finished product, because these are a lot more neutral. They're not brown. They're quite dark. And I actually see that in a lot of, like, even in this thing that Floyd Schultz did here, you see it's a little darker area around the base of the eye. He's taken a little bit of artistic license and put little eyelids on them and stuff like that. I don't see any of that in these photographs, but having these little eyelids above the eye and having a little lighter eyelid and stuff like that makes the piece look more visually appealing. Like it kind of makes it look more human. And I know there's a lot of carvers that tend to add some of those little human touches to the eyes on their birds. Just makes people like them a little bit more. Yeah. So there I've got, I've painted those after I did a little more wash on the back here. I painted those. It's up a little bit, get into the light so you can see what, again, just kind of a roadmap. And you can look at anything on look at your paintings your photographs, and anything where you see there might be a little bit more blotchiness or anything that, where you want to get a little more. I've dried out my brush a little bit, And anywhere that you might want to just put a few blobs or blotches in, um, don't hesitate to just create a little bit more in the way of, like, the brush is quite dry, so I don't have a lot of paint on it. So every time I touch it down, it's not leaving real distinct streaks, but um, dab off my brush and then maybe just create a few more little random blobs in places where, if it just looks too uniform, you can throw a few blobs down. Now, this is just part of the adjustment process. I'm going to take this and touch a brush down to that piece that was a little too light there. See another spot here that I would like to just darken up a little bit. And on that tail where I had that streak happening down there, I'll just pick up a little bit more paint and just a little in there to the low spot. So that's kind of I think at this point, this is where I've got the bird base coated now. I've got the basic roadmap of where all the features are. And I think all the parts that are going to have some brown on them are pretty much done there. You can hopefully see, I'll kind of rotate this around so you can hopefully see 360 degrees what it looks like. And then on the top of the head as well, a little bit streaky. So we'll go from there, let that dry. And then we'll be starting to do a little work with some white on our next bit here. So, that's where working with the blotchiness and the unevenness here will allow us to create feathers. The paint will override the texture for the most part. Like if you're looking at some of these areas on the wingtip here, again, I move that in close and you can see how wait for it to focus here. Come on, focus. There we go. There we are. Focuses in there. You can see how the valleys are dark. Little valleys are dark and the peaks are lighter. So the washes tend to really enhance some of the texture in some of these areas. And even in the back here, you can see, and we'll wait for it to focus. You can see in the back that the valleys, because we've been using washes, the valleys are a little darker and the peaks are a little lighter. And that's one of the advantages of working with washes. So now what I want to do is I want to start to define some of my white and light areas. So, some of the streaks on the top of the head here, some of the little flecks and lines on the outside of the facial disc, some of the streaks on the back of the head. And you can use these photographs to kind of get an idea what some of these things look like. Even the barring on the back of the tail, the outer tail feathers each have a little bit of barring on them. So what I want to do with this, I'm not trying to paint them in so that they look finished. That's a really important distinction. I'm switching to a smaller brush now. I'm going to use this little, the ones we have in the classroom. This one, Low Cornell still made brushes. They've gone out of business, but we have an exactly the same brush in stock now. It's called a King Art Series 9020 Ultra Round, which is in a size 2, which is the one that I like using the most. But in the classroom, we're using these Low Cornells, same brush. So I'm going to use warm white and go with, just bring this down a little bit. I'm going to mix up a wash of warm white, and quite important to keep in mind. These are always washes that I'm using at this stage. I don't generally use thick paint for anything. So a little bit of warm white. If you want, you're working on this at home, you could use unbleached titanium as well. It would work really, really well. Warm white is kind of a little bit of an off-white. Unbleached titanium is a really off-white, like it's a darker, like a browner version of this. This warm white is not a really pure white. I'm mixing in probably about an equivalent amount of water to my paint, like maybe a 50-50 mix anyway of paint and water. And this is especially important at this stage because all I'm trying to do with this initial, and we'll be doing this for the rest of the class today, is all I'm trying to do with this now is to locate where my white streaks are going to be, where the white details are, any white or light details that I want to adjust. And I'll be using this little brush for some of the streaks on the and some of the white features on the tail, on the top of the head, around the facial disc, and that kind of stuff. And I'm going to actually go with, we'll do that first, and then I'll do a little demonstration on using these cat's tongue brushes for laying in some of these marks on the outer edge of the cape. Some of the bigger marks. We'll use a cat's tongue for that. So some of these bigger, oh, I don't have the camera showing. Some of these bigger dots up in here, these guys along this edge, we use a cat's tongue for that, but I'm going to use the little fine pointy brush for everything else. So now have my little piece of paper towel nearby. I wet this brush. I put it in water already. Pick up some, there we go. Pick up some warm white wash with that. Dab off the brush a little bit. I don't want my brush to be dripping wet, but I do want to. So now any place that I'm going to be putting little lines on, like let's just say on the head here, I'm going to be doing some little streaks. This is to help kind of locate them. You want these streaks to follow your feather flow. Now you will notice that as you put them on here, they start to disappear after a while. As they dry, they become less and less apparent. And that you want that. Like that's really important. Dab out your brush, pick up some more paint. And you'll notice some of these streaks look a little bit heavier. If you want to kind of go over some of the streaks that you've already done, you can go over them a second time and it'll make them look a little whiter. So you see what's happening here as I get through these. I'm not looking at individual feathers and trying to paint a particular feather. I'm just creating these little streaks. And I look at my reference and see where the streaks are roughly, how long, how big they are, how close together they are. And as you get further back on the head, they start to get a little smaller and they become less distinct. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do is now I can come along and say, well, this is how far I want them to be. I want them to come back about this far. So I define the outer edge of them. Now, if I end up like this one, I end up with a bit of a blob. No problem. Just let it dry. Because you'll see these things, because this paint is quite thin, as you lay these little streaks down and they dry, they become lighter, like, or darker, if you will, less apparent. So you give things a chance to dry. See how that starts to look.
Dilute it too much. So just
No, you don't have to worry about, if you dilute it too much, you don't have to worry about it spreading because you dab your brush out before you put it on the bird. You don't want a wet, thick, dripping brush. You want, that's why I touch it to the paper towel before I start painting on the bird. If your paint is too diluted and too thin, what'll happen is it'll dry and may almost disappear. Like the line might just, hey, It was white when I put it on. It's gone now. Then you want a little bit thicker paint, but you don't want these when they're dry. You don't want them to be really, really white. You want them to have a little bit of, like worst case scenario, if you got these dots on here and you got, I don't really like the way they look. I'm not really happy with them. Let them dry, take a light wash of burnt umber and wash over the whole thing, and then do it again. Like, and there are times that if I was doing a Saw Whet Owl for competition, I would probably do that deliberately 3 or 4 times, where I'd put the streaks in, then put a light wash over them to just tone them down so they're almost gone, and then put some more streaks in, and then do it again, and keep on building up layers like that. The depth and transparency you get in doing that. But you see now, when I put these dots in, see how the eye just fills in the detail, and these little blobs that I had on the head that looked like almost like mistakes when I first put it in, now actually start to look pretty cool. Like they're and later on, if I want to enhance a few of those things, I can come with a fine brush, some dark, and put a few little dark margins on there and paint in what the actual feather is going to look like. And so again, kind of work with your photograph here. Come in and I got to wet my brush a little bit, dab it out on the paper towel, and come in here and if I want some of these to be a little more closer together, a little more intense at the beginning like this. And you also, if you look at these, you see they're kind of random. Like there's a big opening in here where there's just like one streak and then nothing either side of it. I wouldn't necessarily try to emulate that. It doesn't look that natural, but it gives you an idea that things don't have to be perfectly lined up. And also you will notice that some of these look whiter and some of them don't look near as white. And you can kind of emulate that a little bit by just touching up the base of some of these, making the base a little whiter. And as you go over an area a few more times, what you're doing is you're creating different values of white in each of these feathers. And the eye really is attracted to anything that gives softer values, a variety of values, rather than just having white and brown. And so, again, go over this thing. You're putting in these marks like that, a few little fine ones here and there, dark, whiten up the base of some of them, maybe make it a little wider. Look back at your reference regularly to kind of see what things look and feel like, and make sure you're kind of capturing that look and feel. I've got an area here where I don't think I've got enough white down in there, so I'll look at it from the front, and I'll put a little mark in. Don't just look at it from one angle. Like I was painting it from this angle. That's fine, but now if I look at it from the front, I can see areas where, I need a little bit more in here. And then while you're taking that white there, now what I can do is I can take some of this white and use it to start painting a few little white streaks coming back from my eyebrow. See how that changes that, like from this to this, all of a sudden, just with a few quick little strokes, now you've got that eyebrow looking a lot softer. We're not done yet, but it's a starting point where you're laying in. Like if you've got an area here where you've put some brown that you don't want, just paint a few white streaks over top of that brown and kind of go from there. So what you're doing now is you're looking at, the dots here, the eyebrows. Maybe we'll kind of leave that as a demonstration, like, because that'll probably be enough for you to work on for the rest of the morning. And we'll work on getting the eyebrows and these little dots done on the top of the head. If you do get that done and you're quite happy with the way things are going, you could come along here and just paint a few, like dry out your brush, but there's in most of them here, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 rows of bands and a little bit of banding on the very tip of the tail, so you can paint a few of those things in. Again, you're not trying to paint them in so that you're done. You're just trying to locate where they are. More for location. So I just put in a few little dots in there. Once they, excuse me, once they dry, they become a little more transparent. And that's the real key to the whole thing is thin wash, not too much paint. You don't want them jumping out like a beacon. And you can see how as they dry, they're still visible, they're still there, but they'd be easy to tone down with a thin wash of brown if you did get them too much. And this applying the right consistency of paint is really, really important. Um, you know, see how all of a sudden that just changes things right away just by doing that and by doing that eyebrow. So I'm going to keep working on this. You guys are welcome to pick up a little bit of this warm white from my palette. You're not going to need very much. And use this anywhere that you want to touch up. Get a little bit more white. You can use fine little white streaks. And go from there. Yourself. Yeah. Sit down. It's locked up. Yep. No, I'm using it. If you want to just bring your palette over and just put a few drops on, that'll be great. In there. Oh. Yeah. Or the one that whole, I gotta take it apart. Put it together, now I can't. Something. Oh, yeah. Here's some tools. We'll get in front. Yeah, that's it. That's what after there, Ernie?
I'm just looking to see if I need a little more brown on my head.
Well, I don't think so. Well, let's see. I don't think you do.
No?
No, I think it'll look, I would bring some more brown into these eyebrows, though. Bring the brown down into the eyebrows a little bit more.
Yeah.
You're missing quite a bit of brown above the eyebrows. You want to have that come right up to the edge.
Yeah.
So you'll want to work on that.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see.
You may have to mix up some more. Some burnt umber and some flow medium. You may as well take that too.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm also while I'm while I'm doing these little dots, I'm gonna create a few of the fine little dots around the back edge of the facial disc as well. Just with some really fine little, the finest little dots I can make. Just to define where that back edge of the facial disc actually is. You can see some of them, like in here, these little teeny fine little streaks and dots. What's that?
Set up for my iPad, read it some TV, see a little bit better, but I might have to look at it. So, yeah, nothing. I miss something.
So what I'm doing here with these little dots that I first put in around the facial disc, I'm actually just trying to define where the back edge of that facial disc is and where all the dots are. So more of kind of a roadmap. Few fine little dots here to define the outer and back edge of the facial disc. If you can see where the edge of the facial disc is when you carved it and textured it in, that's great. You can paint what's there. If you can't see, like if your texture is such that you can't really discern where the to the inner and outer edges of the facial disc are, if you can't really see them that well, it's okay. Just wherever you paint them in is where they're going to be. Like I've got these two lines in here, so the inner and outer facial disc. And you can look back at your pattern too. It's never too late to refer back to your pattern to see where things are located. Okay, I think it kind of got that inner and outer facial discs defined. We'll be refining and doing more detail work, kind of finishing refining that next class. Big thing with this step in doing these white things is just try to figure out, where all these different textures are going to go. You can, in addition to putting these little dots in around the edge of the facial disc, you can now just create some fine lines, white lines coming out from the eye. You can see them, lighter lines coming out. You can even start putting a few dots on the base of these little throat feathers here. They tend to be a little lighter on the outside, a little darker down the center here. It's just important to keep in mind, like with this, I'm putting these little bars on the tail. It's important to keep in mind, I'm not trying to make this look finished. I'm using a fairly thin wash of warm white just to indicate where the rings are, where the bands are, like the location of these things. And that's the whole purpose behind this step is using a thin wash. And now this paint's been on my palette for a while, and it's actually starting, some water has evaporated from it. So it's starting to become a little whiter than what it was when I first started putting it on. I may want to add a little bit more water to my palette here just to keep things from being too white. Um, anywhere that you see where you want, like, more white, this is what you start painting some of those things in some areas here, like on the upper edge of the side pocket here. I got I spread some brown down onto the side pocket, and so I can start just by coming with my fine brush and painting over some of that brown that I want to get rid of. Just to start making this upper edge of this transition look a little softer. I'll do more of that later. And also on the underside of the tail here, I can use this white to just kind of touch up any area that I've got some brown that I don't want. I can lighten it up and touch it up there. And even with these streaks, looking at the streaks here, we can actually put in a few little white strokes just to start to bring some of those streaks into a little bit more perspective. Keeping in mind that I can always come back with some brown. In fact, I will likely want to come back with some brown. And I do that one side here. See, so on this side, I've got just a few subtle little white marks. I don't have them on this side yet, and it changes the way things look subtly, but it's there. Now, this one area here is maybe a little darker than what I want it to be, so I can just lay in a few little fine streaks here. And that will make that area look just a little less dark, or a little less stark or intense. And it creates that little blob, creates a little bit of a shadow in the feathers. Dab out my brush, really important. I don't want this brush carrying too much paint. I'm also noticing as I'm doing this that at this point my brush just isn't performing the way I'd like it to. It's getting a bit of paint drying up in the ferrule here and stuff like that. It's just a really good time to clean it. I'm in the habit of regularly cleaning my brushes. Once they start kind of misbehaving a little bit when you're putting the lines on, good time, just get the brush soap out, clean them up real good. And then carry on. It only takes a minute to clean a brush like that, but then it's amazing how well that brush starts performing again after you've cleaned it. Yeah.
Some brush with that hair too. How do you put name?
A stray hair. Quite often what I'll do with those, and these brushes eventually kind of get that going on them. What I'll usually do at home is I'll actually take a little nail clipper or a little X-Acto knife or scissor or something and clip those stray hairs off. I've got a little scissor on one of my small Swiss Army knives that works really well for that. The scissor in the classroom might work. It might be a little big though. Like there's a scissor in each drawer.
Gray hair.
Yeah. You notice I'm kind of cross-hatching some of these. I've got the odd little line that I'm putting in here that does not go fully with my feather flow. Sometimes if you put the odd line in that goes cross to the original feather flow, it can make things look kind of cross-hatched and softer. Don't be afraid to try a few different angles with your line when you're putting it in there. Like on these streaks on the breast. Having a few little white streaks in there can really make things look softer and softer all the time. I've put some white streaks in here. I've done a little bit of work on these throat feathers. Mostly, I think, along the outer edges. I want them to be a little darker in the middle and lighter on the outside edge. So, yeah, we're getting there. In this area here where I had gotten some brown out over these side pockets, I can just keep coming back and touching little bits of warm white over top of the brown. It's going to take several layers to soften it up, but it's coming. Lighten that up. The real key to all this stuff is an attitude of back and forth. You're working with brown, then white, then brown, then white. You see how things are starting to come together.
The container, that you close the lid on this and evaporation. Mix up some brown, leave it in there.
Yeah, you can do that. Just keep going back to it like a little sauce container or something like those little plastic snap lid things. Yeah, anything like that. You can do that, certainly.
Otherwise you'll get the right.
Yeah, as you paint more, you just kind of get to a point where you're looking, going, oh, this paint's a little too white now. I'll add a little more water to it and kind of keep going. Like I kind of think of it more organically that way. But certainly, um, if you're working with you're working with your paint mix at home, you can put it in a little container that will have more consistency. Like keep the lid on it. You just use little bits and pieces of it. Um, I don't find it as important when I'm working with a straight tube color like this. I'm keeping this simple. I'm just working with burnt umber, just working with burnt umber and warm white at this point. If I want to adjust the value of the brown, like if I want to make it redder or something, I would take just a very thin wash of say brown earth or burnt sienna, which is a redder brown, and I'd put a layer, a thin wash of that over top of my brown area, and it'll just tone it down to make it look a little more red. And I might only want to do that in a specific area, like I might just do it with the primaries and wingtip things, because if you look at some of these photographs, on some of them, like here, this really shows the wing is definitely redder than the rest of it. And if you want to do that, you just a light wash of brown earth, which is a redder brown in Joe Sonia, or even burnt umber, or sorry, burnt sienna, which is redder yet than brown earth. And you just kind of play with those until you get a little different value. And then you can always come back and touch up your white marks. Like when you put a wash over top of something, bring the value up, then you can come along and you can touch up some of the white marks, but you don't completely redo them. You just do a few edges and stuff. So now you've added a whole bunch more different tones and values and that kind of stuff. Like every time you put a layer of paint on, you add more interest to the piece. So I think it's a mindset, making sure that you're not afraid to add some wash layers and then touch up. Like when you get to these little dots on the forehead here, they look pretty good. I'm not dissatisfied with them, but they'd look even better if I put a little very light wash of burnt umber over them and then did some of them again. Like they'll look even better when you do that. So it's not a plan B to put washes on. It's plan A is putting those washes on. But you can see already this guy's starting to look pretty interesting with just a basic little bit of painting that we've done this morning. Starting to really come together. And next week we want to just bring it all together and get the last of the little marks in. You can keep on going. Like when we get done next week, you can keep on putting 6 more layers on. And every time you put a layer on, it's a softer, more subtle layer, but it's still another layer. And it makes the whole thing look that much better and better and better. And that's been my experience. So anyway, I think that's where we're at now. Like I'm pleased with the way this guy's coming overall. I'm very happy with the way he looks. He's got put him back over in here so you get a sense of where we're at. So I'm not going to do any more painting on him this week, but see that blotchiness on the back of the head that kind of looked, I don't know, it didn't look ideal. I think most people would look at that and go, oh, I wish it was more uniform. Now, even though I got a little bit of few white streaks and dots in there, they're actually starting to look more like feathers, like those little blobs that they create shadows and they look more like feathers, even on the back. And just wait until you see when we get a few more white marks in there, the way the whole thing just kind of comes together and falls into place. So there we go. That's it for this week. You can, if you're working on it at home, you can keep on putting a few little white streaks on if you'd like. Thin washes. Well, keep in mind, like you laugh about that, but keep in mind that if you look at it and go, it's just too much, too stark, thin wash of burnt umber, and you'd be amazed at how it can come back to life and how it can actually look better as a result. The big thing that I want to recommend though is if you do start putting some streaks and dots on it and you get an area where they look too stark, don't do half of it like that and try to fix the other half. Do it all the same. over the whole area. Like it should look too stark everywhere. And then put a wash over, and it's remarkable how, if you don't panic, how you can get things looking so much softer and better. Like these little streaks that I got coming off the face, they're a little too pronounced right now. They're too distinct. No problem. As they're uniform, they look good. They're in the right location. I'll put a little bit of a wash over them, and then I'll adjust them. So when I'm done, these should look really, really like these nice little bristles coming around the facial disc. These bristles that you see, I'll work these into that. They'll eventually become that. It's just part of the process.